Hello. Today we're going to talk about frybread, one of the most popular kinds of native food, but also a kind of food that has a very interesting history and, as we'll see, has provoked some controversy within the native community. It's delicious, for sure, but is it entirely something that native people want to embrace in 2024? Join us and we'll figure it out. So first off, what is frybread? Frybread is a type of flatbread made from simple ingredients like flour, water, sugar, salt, and fat, traditionally oil or lard, and then fried to a golden brown. It's a traditional food among many Native American tribes in the US. It has, however, a complex and often painful history. It originated during a time of hardship for Native Americans. In 1864, during the Long Walk of the Navajo, the US government forcibly relocated the Navajo from their ancestral lands in Arizona to a reservation in Bosque Redondo, New Mexico. The ingredients for frybread were part of the limited rations provided to the Navajo by the government, including flour, salt, lard, sugar, and baking powder. These days, frybread thus seems to be a symbol of resilience and survival among Native Americans. It's often featured at powwows, cultural events, and family gatherings. There are restaurants devoted just to frybread. It can be eaten plain with toppings like honey or powdered sugar, or used as a base for quote-unquote Indian tacos, topped with ingredients like beans, cheese, lettuce, and meat. As I've just said, frybread can be seen as a symbol of resistance. In the midst of the terrible conditions of the Long Walk, the Navajo were able to make something out of what they had been given by the government. It shows survival, it shows adaptation, it emerged as a response to those harsh conditions imposed by the government. By creating something nourishing and delicious out of the limited and unfamiliar ingredients that they were given, Native people demonstrated their resilience and their adaptability. Perhaps it's unsurprising then that it's become a staple of Native cuisine and a symbol of cultural identity. It represents the survival of Native traditions and ways of life in spite of these attempts at forced assimilation and relocation. Furthermore, preparing and sharing frybread can be something of a communal activity. It reinforces bonds within Native communities. It serves as a reminder of that shared history and collective strength in the face of peril. It can be seen even as a kind of political symbol, a symbol of defiance against historical injustices and ongoing marginalization. And because it's so good and popular, it's a way to educate people, both Native children, Native teenagers, and those who are outside the Native community, a way to educate them about the history and the struggles of Native Americans. People often say this about food. It's the one thing that we all tend to share, and so it's a really good way to bring your culture to another person. This is not just true for Native people, but for all sorts of different people in the US and beyond. So sharing the story behind frybread helps raise awareness about the impact of colonialism and the resilience of Indigenous peoples. And yet, as I've said, it can be somewhat controversial. Here's some reasons why. First off, health concerns. Frybread's often criticized for its nutritional content. It's really high in calories, fat, and refined carbohydrates, which can contribute to health issues like obesity and then subsequently diabetes and heart disease, conditions that are already very prevalent in many Native communities due to historical and socioeconomic factors. Also, what I just said about the whole frybread historical resilience thing, it also can be a kind of trigger, a reminder of the suffering and oppression that ancestors endured. These ingredients were provided during the Long Walk, which is a time of history that displays the kind of iniquity of the US government. So it could be seen as a symbol of colonial subjugation rather than cultural resilience. In fact, I think one could argue that many symbols of cultural resistance can also double as symbols of colonial subjugation. This is sort of one of the problems of colonialism. It allows for the production of syntheses that are displays of resilience, but of course that resilience had to come in the face of something like subjugation. There's also a debate about the authenticity of frybread as a traditional Native food. I listed a bunch of the ingredients used to make frybread, and notably, it was created using certain non-Native ingredients provided by the government, right? It doesn't represent indigenous culinary traditions that existed prior to colonization. The work of the great scholar Devon Mihisua, who works in this field called Indigenous food studies, Indigenous food sovereignty, articulates the ways in which this is just a symbol of a kind of already maybe accepted imposition of assimilation. So while frybread is celebrated by many as a symbol of resistance and survival, it can also be seen as a constant reminder of the trauma and displacement inflicted by colonial powers. This is a duality that makes it a complex and sometimes divisive symbol within Native communities. So some native chefs these days in communities are advocating for a return to pre-colonial diets. These emphasize traditional, nutrient-rich foods. This is a movement, Indigenous food sovereignty, that highlights a desire to reclaim and revitalize Indigenous foodways that were disrupted by colonialism. All in all, though, I think what Frybread does is it makes us think about what symbols of survival and resistance can also conjure. Namely, a kind of further discussion about whether these symbols are the appropriate symbols. Nothing comes to us predetermined, right? When we have symbols of the past, those things need to be critically examined, seen from multiple perspectives, seen from multiple angles, and not just accepted wholesale as being what one group of people says it is. Frybread tastes great. I had it myself just last week, and I think that it's inarguable that it tastes quite good. But what does it mean? I mean, that's a much more interesting discussion. Anyway, thank you so much for this journey.